Hi, Amanda.
Hello.
Thank you so much for making time to have this conversation and talk about what we do wrong.
Thank you for
What do we
having me.
do when things go wrong?
Thank you for having me. I feel really quite pleased to be having a conversation with you about things like this because it's not like we don't talk about this stuff, is it? Yeah, it's good.
Definitely. And so, I really wanted to kind of like spend some time thinking about um, the, I guess, the challenging moments when conflicts come up maybe, as well as different values rub up against one another, and organizational dynamics and personal dynamics rub up against one another. And yeah.
When you invited me, I was like, oh, that's really lovely. I'm really excited to be in this conversation. And I started thinking about it and I thought, did she invite me because it's happened so often to me? Is it because I am the expert on things going wrong because am I the drama? But actually, I think it did touch on, thinking about it like that, did touch on how and why Inkart started, because I have had, like so many of us have, so many instances of those small granular things as well as the big things that have happened that don't feel right. And Inkart for me was one way of going, actually, how can I use those experiences usefully to shape solutions centered by those who've got experience of harm rather than from an abstract of policy and processes of an organization. So I think a lot of this conversation, if you're okay with it, will lean into the work at Inkart because there's purpose and value around the principles of advocacy and building that evidence. And I think some of that will come out in this, as well as the am I the drama stuff, because clearly the yes.
I mean, I think that the work that you have done with Inkart has been so incredible for the sector as a whole, as in like the cultural sector, particularly because, here we are in 2022, September 22. We've been living with a pandemic for 2 years. It's also, of course, like 2 years since the murder of George Floyd, and how that really shifted conversations around race, particularly, as well as, as we were considering everything that happened in the pandemic, the fact that so many disabled people have been impacted, as well as working class communities who have been, as we say, left behind.
Yeah, the margins have been marginalised further while the spotlight has been shone on them, but all the margins are further adrift from where they were. Yeah,
exactly. And within that context, and particularly, I guess, with thinking about the rising cost of living and stuff, then both individuals and organizations are having to face really challenging situations. So, I guess that's a bit of the more objective or empirical kind of like context behind this conversation as well.
And the context is stark, isn't it? It's really quite, it's such a challenge to come for organizations and individuals. I kind of wonder whether we're really aware of just how much challenge there is to come in a way. At least with pandemic, we didn't know. There's a beauty in ignorance. Not knowing that you're going to be 2 years locked in your house is a damn sight better for my money. Knowing is preferable to knowing that in about 6 months' time, your income's going to be about 80% of its value and then some. So it's definitely a really brutal context to be in. Horrid.
So shall we dive in?
Yeah.
I know that you've got some things prepared, as have I. Where should we start?
So, well, like I said, when you said, oh, come and talk about when things go wrong, I did kind of go, well, for me and all of them, and how long have you got? Because, there are so many instances. We have so many instances. So I kind of took myself out of the story and went, what do we mean by going wrong? And are we talking about, is it going wrong for individuals and what individuals can do? Or are we talking about what is the wrong caused to individuals by organizations and what is the appropriate response by organizations? And I hope we can talk about both, but I kind of wanted to reflect, there are two different bits of it, aren't there? There are two different bits that are both useful to think about. So when I think about wrong, I kind of think about it in terms of the three different levels of hell, if you like. Don't know if the Catholic imagery will work for you, but I'm not even Catholic. I don't know why I thought about it like this, but I did think about the limbo land, the discomfort place, where you are in an organization, you're in a context where you kind of go, was that me? Was that a bit funny? I'm not really sure. I feel a bit about that. And you're never sure because it was something that was just slight or occasional or a rub that just didn't sit well with you. I call that the kind of discomfort level. And I'm sure we've both got examples of those discomfort levels. My favorite is, for me, a friend of a friend coming to join us for coffee and ruffling my hair. And I'm like,
Oh, just no.
really? I haven't seen her since, but I know when I next see her, I'm so going to go ruffle her hair. How are you? Anyway, but for me, that's the slight discomfort. What just happened there? Was she just being weirdly over affectionate? But, but that's a discomfort level. Those little weird interactions that make you go, oh, that's a bit icky. Then you've got that kind of, I'm sure something's happened, the certainty, and I don't want a big escalation, but I do want someone to acknowledge it. I can give an example fairly recently where hysterically I challenged somebody on, they had talked about a woman and then talked about a black man. And I was like, that's interesting that she was a woman. And I asked, was she a black woman? And she went, no, she was a white woman, but he was a black man. And when I talked to her about this woman got my name wrong and called me by the name of the black woman that she was working with on EDI, which was mind-blowing. Which was
That
really
happens far too often, actually.
It happens too often. So, I could see her brain was actively engaged in thinking about equity, but her own stuff made her go, whoa, black woman kind of thing. That for me is the certainty. I don't really, I need to have acknowledgement of that. I need her to know I saw that, or someone else to go, yeah, I got that, which is actually what happened in that instance. The third person in the meeting afterwards went to me, yep, that was a bit cringe. I saw that. So that's the kind of certainty and acknowledgement, but I don't need the organization to drag her into a tribunal and, don't need that. Yeah. So that discomfort level of wrongness, there's the certainty level of wrongness where you need acknowledgement. And then there's the, let's call it, I don't know, the napalm version, where you actually need to go through the proper processes and raise a formal complaint and take it to tribunal or wherever else has a conclusion. Now, that middle place, that certainty and acknowledgement, I think there are two things that are vital, and that's a reconciliation space and learning to be had from that. They're the things that I most want to happen. Don't do it again, and you know why you don't need to do it again, because you've learned something from it. I think it's useful to say something about trust. Absolutely. Because all of this stuff really erodes trust, and trust is nearly impossible to recreate once it's lost. It's such a fragile thing, but you can build processes of transparency so that you can rebuild trust and learn from your mistakes. If you're doing something with transparency, using the disinfectant of sunlight, shining a light on those harms and sharing the ills more widely, that trust can over time be repaired. If it never is with that individual, it can be with organizations. How are you feeling about my different levels of hell? Did that make sense?
Yeah, good. I mean, I don't feel good about them, but I think it's really useful. I think particularly I wanted to go into the napalm level because I feel like the discomfort is something that actually doesn't always have to be, doesn't necessarily come up as something that's shared.
Yeah.
And that might be taken to a different space in order for it to be shared.
And I think that's where the real change can be made, actually. I absolutely think that is the key, because as you know, and anyone who talks to me knows, that I can rarely say anything around equity without talking about data and accountability. But that's absolutely where the gains are to be had, that where you can build a narrative, evidence-based narrative about the attrition of harms being caused, that discomfort, you can then go, actually, it's not just me, it's not just a small thing. Even if these small things happen over and over again, there's too much of it. And without that data story, it's very difficult to say that. It stays quite atomized. So I am still looking forward to the organization and the individual who pulls together a process where we can all record and collectively track the instances of that discomfort level. Because as we know, small snowflakes make up a storm. We don't want to wait till the storm is there.
Yeah, precisely. And thinking about that data from an intersectional perspective, I think is really important. And I still think that there's a lot of work to be done in that area. And I'm also waiting for that kind of like intersectional analysis to take place, like both the collection, but also the analysis, and someone to kind of like really go, this is the methodology that will be really robust. And then I guess like going into the recognition level, then there's a lot around a kind of interpersonal dynamic, particularly within organizations. And I wonder how that can be spoken to in a way, or if you've got any reflections about that part.
So I don't know, can I try and show you something on my camera? Because I think, let's see if it works.
Let's see.
Can you see that picture?
Yes, I can. It's a gate with a...
It's a gate with a little colourful thing in the corner. I will show you what the colourful thing in the corner is. The little colourful thing in the corner is this.
Spread love, stop hate.
And a QR code for reporting harms. So this is in and around the neighbourhood I'm in at the moment. And one that worked for sector. Imagine if we walked into creative spaces and we had a sign like that, where you could actually record the harm anonymously. What an amazing picture that would build. What an amazing truth we'd see from that. Now, obviously, we'd get, as you do, that Google review where you go, I stayed in that restaurant for 5 minutes and it was the worst experience I've ever had. You'll obviously get some of that, but actually you will get pictures of long-term trends. And that's the thing where you talk about speaking about those interpersonal relationships. Again, the sector we're in has such a high degree of agency. We are all here because we make and we do, and we make things happen. So when it comes to harms perpetrated against us, we feel, I think, even more bereft than in some corporate organizations, because elsewhere we have agency, right? We can make stuff, and then this thing happens and we can't, often because of that personal relationship. That person knows someone, you'll never work again, all of that stuff. There are so many instances of that we can talk to. But actually having an independent way of recording and tracking those instances would be an absolutely amazing way to slightly undercut the anxiety felt in reporting or taking it further because of those interpersonal relationships you have. I think it would be absolutely astonishing.
Yeah, that's really true.
I'm really struck. So let me backpedal a bit. Where I am at the moment at the Forward Institute, it's an organisation that looks at how we make responsible leaders. So a lot of the work around equity and justice absolutely is in their wheelhouse. What struck me when I joined them was I think this is the only time this has ever happened in my entire career, and I'm old, right? Only time it's happened. At interview, they said to me, "What can we do to make you stay here?" We
That's
see
great.
you move around a lot.
Beautiful.
I was freelance. There's a lot of freelance experience, and they're a very corporate organization. So a freelance CV looks very different in the corporate world. And they looked at that and they went, okay, this person moves around a lot. What can we do to make you stay here? And what we did was develop my own personal rider. Right? And we've got some beautiful examples in the sector already. My
Yeah,
mind goes to the anti-racism touring
great.
rider. She's incredible. I've never been able to say that, by the way. I've spent ages calling it the anti-touring racism rider. I don't know. Anti-racism
And
touring
everyone's
rider.
like, no, no, not that.
Not that. Not that one. But to have developed a very clear code on what your needs, preferences are, but crucially, what your bottom line is. What are the things that are going to be the deal breaker for you? What's the point at which you're going to go, now I'm done? Is a really great place to start. And that's for individuals and organizations. As I said, I was very impressed. And it's the reason why I said yes to that job, actually, that they said that from the outset. But it's perfectly replicable across other sectors. The rider plus that independent voice, that independent reporting monitoring space, because of the trust. Once it's broken, it's hard to rebuild. So we have to find a way to take our complaints elsewhere, which is useful for us to share it, but also maintain a relationship with those people that we have in the space with us.
Mm-hmm. So thinking about the personal rider as a space to set out boundaries, is that what
Yeah,
you're
absolutely.
thinking
Absolutely.
about
But
it?
it's also really important to know and have in place the process by which you escalate issues, and for you personally to go, what's the point where I just go, this is not for me?
That's it. Yeah.
And again, in a creative space, that rarely happens because we are so geared towards solutions, making it happen, putting the show on, making sure we get to the end point, that we accept mission creep. We absolutely accept, we did say we'd finish at 6, but we're going to finish at 9. Is that okay? And we go, yeah, okay, just the once. And then it's regular. And then months down the line, you're like, oh yeah, I'm working every night on Thursdays, but I'm not getting paid. We just need clarity ourselves from the outset on what your bottom line is.
Yeah, for sure. So I was thinking about the role of dialogue and conversation, because obviously some of these things, people who find themselves in a situation that is inequitable, let's say, or what problematic in some ways, might feel like it's a massive step to be using these. If they existed, it might be a massive step for them to use these platforms or to use these mechanisms, but actually they might want to have a conversation and things. So I guess that is just going back to the napalm level again of
Well,
the reconciliation part and the learning part, which to me seem more discursive, actually, in a
yeah,
way. I don't
yeah.
know what you think.
Yeah, I think that in so many instances, not all, that lack of the blurring of boundaries between HR and line management are so problematic in the sector, because we work in small teams and nobody's got that HR function, and we don't have that independent space to raise a complaint, because actually the person who's leading on HR is also the person who's causing you harm. I think that is a real challenge, both for organizations and for individuals. And I would be really interested to see organizations come together and share an independent and neutral HR space. If you had an HR person that worked across 5 or 6 different organizations, who knew those organizations and did 2 days a week for each one, you know, a small amount. So we spread it across our budgets in a way that's useful when we're thinking about the budgets we work on. But if we had that expertise that was slightly outside of the organization and also had the perspective of what's happening in other organizations, what an amazing dialogue that would be for someone to be able to go, oh, actually, no, you're not alone, because I've got recent examples of X and Y having that happen too. And that person to be able to bring a data story to those organizations and go, this is not an isolated situation. This is not just Amanda experiencing this. This is not just Celia being difficult. This is something that is happening. I think you're absolutely right. That discursive space is really vital, but I think it's equally vital for that discussion to be independent. I think there is something really vital for us all, freelancers, to be working where we know those conversations are not necessarily going to impact on us getting work down the line and having that distance. More than that, though, I think there is something about training and developing people to have those conversations.
Absolutely, yeah.
So many instances I can draw on, and for confidentiality, I'm going to lump them all together and call them Theatre B. And doing a lot of work with Theatre B, a medium outside London organisation with a great reputation. One of the things that came up very quickly, and again, we were invited in because it was about problems in a production process around racism in this instance, coupled with a track record of other people reporting harm in that organisation. So we were dealing with a present, but we were also dealing with lots of people going, oh yeah, Theatre B, they've been problematic to me. And the first thing that came up was the nervousness of the organisation of reputational risk, their absolute sphincter clenching fear of being called out in a public space, which meant that the dialogue was like treading on eggshells because they were so fearful. So again, I think there's something mutual and that might feel quite, might feel a bit of a sop or a sellout for the individuals confirmed, but I think there's really something useful in maintaining confidentiality while you're in a discussion.
Which is really, really hard. It's so hard.
Really hard. It's really hard.
But that, I suppose, speaks to the trust piece as well. Yeah. I think that word is really key, like trust and fear put alongside each other in this situation is really important, as in when things go wrong, we go to that place of fear.
Yeah.
And that fear makes us do silly things.
Yes. But again, that need to talk and how that sits with feeling like you're protecting other people's reputations, because that can be how it feels, can't it, when you know something awful's happening to you, but you don't feel like you're allowed to talk about it in a public space because it might have an effect on your future work or whatever, or the process itself. Actually, again, thinking about the good stuff that came from that collective solutions finding that INCART's created. The other thing that I think is really powerful that I see some sectors, some organizations, and not enough yet, in my opinion, but credit to all of those that are doing it, the stuff that's coming out that is really amazing is the mental health support given to all staff at all levels, ongoing, wherever they need it. Because sometimes it's a bit like confessional again, isn't it? That if you're going through a process of complaint, that's fine, and you hope for a good outcome in that, but you still have lots of residual anger, guilt, upset that needs to be taken somewhere else and is really important for you to have, but also the organizations or individuals receiving it. Because let's remember that receiving negative feedback is really hard. It's really, really hard to hear that properly. So that mental health support, that facilitation support in the conversation, yes, all doing that, but that mental health support to help it, first for you to feel unburdened in a safe way, but also for the individuals, the perpetrators of harm, to feel like they have space to grow and learn and have a guide and a steer to do that as well is so vital. That, I think, is the change in that conversation that is still far too rare in the sector.
Totally, totally. In other words, that these things, as in the reconciliation piece, as well as the learning piece, are kind of supported by other structures underneath. That
100%.
you've got, I guess, in the reconciliations piece, you've got, what do you have as a support structure underneath that?
Yeah.
I guess that is really important as a unionist, as a trade unionist. Then I would say that unions play an important role in that as well,
Yes.
in order to support like the individuals who have essentially suffered this harm.
Yes.
And then I guess like in the learning piece and receiving that negative feedback, like how can individuals within the institution, as well as the person who's experienced that harm, have that mental health support so that they can kind of get on with that learning process and actually put some of those thoughts somewhere that doesn't necessarily belong in the learning process itself.
Yes. Yes. And I think unions have an absolutely vital place in all of this. And I also believe that there is so much sitting on unions that is almost outside scope. And even if it's not outside scope, it's so much for them to be carrying. Because again, we know, don't we, that unions have the stuff we're talking about. If they were able to share it, they already have the data narrative about the lots and lots of small scale complaints and harms that have been caused. They don't have the space or the agency, and they're not set up and they're not meant to be sharing that data narrative in a public space or in a way that would help organizations privately. No union, to my knowledge, tell me if I'm wrong, would go to a national organization and go, I'm so glad you're here, new chief exec. Let's sit down and talk about the last 15 years narrative of this organization. And these are a few things that you need to do because we've got this, it just wouldn't
That's not how it works.
they're firefighting on behalf of their members, but they actually have that data story. So again, for me, it's about building that data story independently of the unions, because unions have a phenomenal job to do, but it ain't that.
Yeah.
But to be able to build that narrative and go, welcome, new chief exec, here's your data on that. So just so you know, people are looking for this change, and here are some solutions for change, because this is the thing that keeps happening here.
Yeah. Totally. I wonder if we can go just back to like the learning part and how and what happens with that kind of like negative feedback, or like just the fact that, maybe there is some learning, but it gets forgotten.
Yeah.
And
So,
then history repeats itself.
do you know, I'd love to say that it was unique to the sector, but my word, it isn't. I mean, God, what does it take? Look at where we are. I mean, let's put aside all of this harms. It's like, look at the economy, look at where we are. Hello, that happened before. We maybe quite practically humans aren't in a place where they learn from their mistakes as well as we think we should. Frankly, maybe it's that, but how we might do this usefully, I look at organizations which have created really useful independent negative feedback capture, let's call it complaints capture. So the usual best practice, and I'd like to call it good practice, is where you send a staff survey. How are you doing quarterly? What are you saying about this? And then you bring that to a staff meeting and somebody talks about the complaints, and then somebody announces a new set of measures. That happens, and I'd say that is good, but not brilliant. And better would be if we were doing it in a more peer-reviewed way. I think it makes for much more integrated change if somebody knows that somebody else is keeping their records. If I had the track record on everyone Cecilia's worked with and how they found it, and Cecilia had everything that everyone who's worked with Amanda and how they found it, you can bet your life in our next conversation we'd be trying to improve on both of those, and we'd be at the very least checking through before we next met to go, oh, actually, there is this one outstanding. I need to deal with that so that I look like I'm covered in glory. I think a peer-reviewed process for organisations would be phenomenal in terms of complaints. A pooled version would be even better. And that's how you build the learning, because if you have something that takes it way beyond the staff survey, like the reporting harm QR code I've just shown you, if you have something that gathers that information and then we nationally share the learning and the outcomes, and that becomes rolled into an organisation's way of working, again, would be amazing, is not the job of any one organisation or individual at the moment. And right now, without a central way of collective advocacy around social class, protected characteristic, there isn't a space for us to do that. But that peer reviewing of making data, accountable data, building that monitoring and sharing it is the first part of making the change that you need to have and keeping it current and keeping it actively engaged. I think that would be amazing.
Yeah.
It's like someone should set up an organization to do this, right?
I think you're the data champion, and I'm the stories and dialogue champion.
How do you think we should share those stories as we go? Because I do fear they get lost. I do.
I think publishing is really important, actually. And I think, well, this is, yeah, I was going to put this back to you, actually, because publishing what's going on in the sector, I think, is really important. However, it may feel really risky for people.
Yes. Yes.
And so, you know, particularly within the funding cycles that we all experience within the arts, what does that kind of mean for people to share things and to participate in something that isn't necessarily completely collective?
Yeah.
If we're not all doing it, then how is it okay for me to be doing it and maybe not you?
Yeah. So I can give an example with Directors UK, which I think was it's a while ago, but I think the principles are really valid now. So with Directors UK, we were seeing really high numbers of female directors coming to our events. But Directors UK is a royalty distribution house. It pays people money for when their works are screened on TV or film. And we were seeing loads of women coming to live events, and no women, I mean, really tiny numbers of women being paid in royalty distribution. So what that told us, the data story was, there are lots of women members, but the men are getting the work. Long story short, we worked with the 7 biggest broadcasters who together represent something like 99% of broadcast production in the UK. We went through all of their credits. Again, the data story was there because the credits are on the programme, so we could actually say, without any risk to each organisation, we could say, actually, BBC employs X% on evening drama or Y% on children's drama. We could say that very clearly. But here's the bit that I think was really smart, and here's the bit that I would recommend for the sector around risk and trust and reputation management. When we had these incredible stories, my favourite being Doctor Who had only ever had one female director, and that was in 1976, and she was married to somebody,
Stop.
one of the producers, right? So there was one female producer prior to 2016, 17, I think.
Wow.
Rather than go public with this, oh my God, what the hell? I worked with all of those broadcasters and shared their data with them privately in really good time to go, look at this, what can we build together so that when we go public, which we will, you've put steps in place to make it, this is your baseline from which you grow. Now, you can't get more reputation aware than TV drama producers, simply. They're ready for it, right? They are ready and they've got the means to shoot you down. The risk is very high. The damage to the brand is very, very high, and the budgets are huge. They can't muck about. They need to get this right. So in terms of the arts and cultural sector and risk, I would absolutely recommend building the big data story, but not going public with it, going directly to those organizations and going, here are the problems, here are the instances, here are the pressure points in your craft. That means that you need to do something, and working with them so that when they do come out annually, here is the table of what's happened. They've already got steps in place to work on it. And that for me is a very responsive and iterative way of making change that also respects the needs, the very real needs, and one that I can, as a former leader, relate to, for organizations to have security that their dirty linen isn't just going to be washed or thrown out there without any recourse to mitigation.
Yeah, definitely. And I hope that people didn't think that I was going to throw everyone's dirty linen out into the public as well, because that's not what I meant at all.
No, I get that. No, I just mean in terms of that risk and reputation, that was a really great, I think, experience for me and all of those female directors. I mean, you look at Dr. Who's credits now, completely different. I picked that one. There were loads. It's a very different landscape because all of them, like you said, none of them wanted to work on their own on it. Why should I do it? And they not. So it was a collective piece, but we shared the individual stories, which were very, very divergent with the individuals. So there was a different scale of what needed to be done where you were, but collectively people were changing.
Yeah, I think scale is really important in this context because on the one hand, I think what you're saying is that we need to build these kind of like large scale structures so that there are mechanisms that exist within the sectors as well. But at the same time, there's something that everyone can do, right? There's something that everyone can do.
And those structures need to be
Reflecting.
independent. Those structures need to be independent because the trust is not there with big organizations and may not be there if you think that that individual can affect your career.
Yeah. But just going back to the kind of like the smaller scale things, because I think, you know, when we say, what do we do when things go wrong? Then some of that is also like just panic. People panic. There's denial, there's panic, there's guilt, there's fear, there's all of those things. And I always think about what can be put in place within small scale contexts, so that when those things do happen, then how do we not go to those places, those, you know, intense emotional places, or those kind of like reflex actions that people have?
So I think when things go wrong, you're absolutely right. Gonna cough, excuse me. No, I'm not. Individuals, what do? We either sulk and move away, or we get very activated and throw fuel on the fire. For organizations, we either dig down and deny, or we double down and throw that person to the wolves. Both organization and individual working in a place of stress and reactivity both with disastrous outcomes. So again, where do we have the space for measured, careful conversation that has the mental well-being built in? I keep coming back to that because I think that as a sector, we're very used to facilitated conversations, and we are in varying degrees of use to having a facilitated conversation that also has good mental health support within it or around it. So the first thing is, weirdly, teaching people to breathe. The first thing is to go, how do we stop people responding quickly? We actually build the space for them to share. Before you react, you need to share in a way that is careful and safe and not necessarily public, I think is absolutely vital. When things go wrong, whatever those things are, most people, almost everyone, have a need, a desire to tell that story, to talk it out, right? So how do we talk that out before it becomes a performance, before we put it on Twitter, before we then make a piece of work about it, is absolutely crucial. And that brings me back to that mental health piece. I think we definitely in this sector, because we have that degree of agency, more than other sectors, need to have that well-being spirit guide in our conversations with us.
Well-being spirit guide.
I would love
I love
one.
that. Yeah, me too.
You just feel so much healthier, wouldn't you? Like an arts sector doula.
That's great. I love that. I
Yeah,
love that so much. I feel like we could carry on for another half a day.
we could. We could. I don't know if anyone could watch it for half a day. We'd have to have loo breaks and snacks.
We could
But
do
just
that. Maybe when we meet up.
okay. Okay.
So we've got the art sector doula. Any other final thoughts?
I think for organisations, it's really worth, and this feels so, to me, it feels really obvious. And again, as a leader, I understand the fear that other leaders have about this, but I still think it's probably right. There is so much fear about putting your hand up and going, yeah, I got that wrong. And if you look around, I mean, a quick Google search will tell you that the organisations that actually stand up first and go, yeah, I think we've messed up here and we're dealing with it, almost always come out better, stronger than those organisations that decide on a blanket ban until they get their ducks in a row. I think actually the first thing to do is to go, yeah, I think we have messed up. We're looking into it. And then don't leave it there. Keep people engaged with your learning. Keep people engaged with what you're doing, because that comes back to the trust piece. Build that trust by being transparent
And open. Yeah, definitely. Such wise words as ever, Amanda. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
taking this time and for all of your reflections. And I feel like there's analysis in there as well as like some solutions and proposals. Yeah, it's just been fantastic to talk with you.
Thank you. It's been really fun. It's always fun. It's always fun. We could stay up hours.
All right then. Thank you so much. And
See you.
see you.